Hello and welcome to a new episode of The Collector, and hey, thanks for watching. And today I wanted to do things a little bit different again, and I wanted to show you my game room tour from Romania. In the last 4 years I have moved to the UK and my home is now here, but I still remember fondly my game room from Romania. And it was a small game room, and by US and maybe Western standards is not exactly the best and the most largest game collection, but it was nice and cozy. I want to share this game tour with you, and I want to know what you guys think. Do you guys think this is a nice game room tour, or do you think it's just maybe not up to standards? I think I've made good enough efforts to make it shine, so tell me what you think. And we find ourselves looking at the shelves that were always behind me while I was filming my YouTube videos back in the day. And you see, I like to have everything organized, and at the same time each shelf represents a different era, but they also represent stuff like my love for fighting games or certain franchises. To the left of that I have small trinkets and things like small collectibles. They're not exactly like the amiibos of nowadays, but they were nice toys that I like to collect. And also you can see some of the PlayStation 2 games back there and Sonic Mania. There's also a few Atari games. Didn't have that many at that time, but also my collection of Sega Mega Drive. And also this wasn't so big back then, but I really like to keep the loose cards separate to the ones that I have in the case. And you can see here that I only have one card for the Master System, and that has not changed nowadays. I still have just a few cards of Master System. And as you can see at the top of the shelf, I like to keep the boxes at the same place that I'm storing my game collection, because I do not like to put those in storage. Some collectors might like that, but I still like to display them. And as soon as we go from left to right, you can see my Xbox 360 and Xbox One collection. I keep them all in one shelf, and we can start with my Xbox 360 collection. And here are some of the games. We can see different styles of games as Final Fantasy, Metal Gear Solid collection, but also my favorite, the Dark Souls. And here are some of my Xbox One collection, and we can see Dark Souls 2 is on this one, but stuff like The Witcher are not absent. But I'm a retro gamer at heart, so you can see Rare Replay hidden beneath Dragon Age Inquisition. Moving forward from there, we have my Castlevania altar. So we can see the two PlayStation 2 Castlevania games, Castlevania on the NES, the Game Boy Advance Castlevania Circle of the Moon, and there's Aria of Sorrow missing, but we can see I have Castlevania Harmony of Dishonest, but we definitely cannot miss classics like Castlevania 4 on the Super Nintendo. And moving on is my Metroid altar. So we can see the Metroid games on the GameCube, Game Boy Advance, but even Game Boy. And then we see that I also have the DS Prime Hunter, but also the new and improved Samus Return on the Nintendo 3DS. Moving down from there, we have my PlayStation 2 collection, and next to that I like to keep this little nice omen of my three favorite consoles, the Genesis, the Super Nintendo, and the NES. And I did that myself by sacrificing 3 controllers. And here we have some of my PlayStation 2 games, and you can see that they vary, and they're all kinds of games. And among them you can see more expensive and rare stuff like Siren 2, the classic Resident Evil 2, God of War, the Jack series, and Silent Hill games. And I'm a big fan of the fighting games, so here are some of the games that I like to keep on display. So we can see that Tekken is a favorite, but also Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. King of Fighters is one of my favorite, but I also have hidden stuff like One Piece Burning Blood, and this was a demo disc that I won at a competition. We can see small stuff like Street Fighter 2 and Killer Instinct on the Game Boy, but even more uncommon stuff like Street Fighter Pocket Fighters on the PlayStation. And the reason I'm keeping those 3DS games like that is because I only have the loose copies, and I will be looking for the cases later. Tekken is one of my favorite fighting games, so I do have the game on the 3DS, although it's not that good, but there's also more retro stuff hidden there, like the PlayStation Tekken 2 game. We can see things like Street Fighter Alpha 3 for the PSP, and hidden behind there, Virtual Fighter on the Sega Saturn, but also the Budokai collection for the PlayStation 2. And if we look even more carefully, we can see that Naruto has its place on the fighting altar. Moving down from that, we have my PSP collection and the few games that I have in the boxes for the Mega Drive and the Master System. But first, let's see a few games that I like to collect for the PC, and Diablo 2 is one of my favorite, next to Baldur's Gate. And I'm a novice to these types of games, the old PC games that used to come on multiple CDs or on multiple floppy disks, but I really enjoyed them ever since I found Metal Jesus Rocks, and back then I think it was the first time I discovered his channel, and look at this, Baldur's Gate, full on 3 disc, amazing. And let's have a look at some of my PSP collection, and you can see that Final Fantasy is there, and even crazy stuff like Roco Loco, and I like to collect these collection games, like you see there, Activision Hits collection, stuff like God of War, and also more Final Fantasy and others. I was never a collector of PlayStation, being a collector of Xbox 360, but here are the few games I have for it, and again the few games that I have for the Mega Drive that are in boxes. And we can see my all-time favorite Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate. This game was played by me and my friends for a long time. And if we move more down in the shelf, we can see that I have these 2 boxes that I like to keep all types of extra cables, some controllers in there, and all type of small adapters and cables that you need for all the consoles. And I do like to keep them nicely and organized in these bags so they don't get too tangled. And moving to the right side, we have my collection of Nintendo games. We have the Nintendo Switch, Wii U, Wii, and GameCube. We can also see the 3DS has a spot there, and as you can see, I did not possess a big collection at that time, and to be honest, not even to this day. Only my Nintendo Switch collection has gotten bigger. And I like to have a diversity of games. My collection now is about 120 games. You can see a few Wii U games that I had, and then my Wii collection. Really like the Wario series, and Wario Land there is really amazing. And then moving forward to my GameCube collection, I am very proud to have the Game Boy Player disc, which is very rare, and then the series of Donkey Konga games, which are very, very fun. Also classics like Mario Sunshine, Luigi's Mansion, Mario Kart, Pikmin, and I'm quite happy with my collection for GameCube. And here is my collection of games for the 3DS, and you can see that I'm mostly a first-party title Nintendo guy, but at the same time I like to throw things like Shantae and the Inazuma 11 collection. Even though I never actually played those games, for some reason I like to collect those. You can see things like Fire Emblem and Kirby. Moving down from there is my Zelda altar, and Zelda is one of my favorite games of all time, and we can see that there's Zelda games from all generations. And then there's 2 Game Boy Advance Special Project Zelda edition there. We have Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess on both Wii and Wii U, the amazing Breath of the Wild, Ocarina of Time, and Link Between Worlds on the 3DS, but also the beautiful Majora's Mask. And there are a few Dragon Ball games on the Game Boy Advance that are lost here, but also we can see Zelda 4 Swords Adventure on the GameCube, and also the Nintendo 64 originals. And now the reason I have 2 of these Zelda editions Game Boy Advance SP is because the scratch one you see here is the actual original one, and you can see that it's kind of used. And I loved this model so much that I bought an aftermarket case and did a shell swap with one of my other Game Boy Advance SPs. I think it turned out quite good. Moving down from that, we have my NES and Super NES collection, and as you can see, is not that big, even though the NES and the Super NES are 2 of my favorite consoles. And you can see I like to keep these small toys all around my shelf just to make it more interesting. And ignore the Powerpuff Girls, but as a kid I really liked that show. And we can see that there's Pokemons behind there, but also Luffy, the Kings of Pirates, which is is one of my favorite animes, well, Dragon Ball being the first one. Let's have a look at my Nintendo games, and DuckTales is one of my favorite, but also Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, Super Mario 3. Moving forward, let's see my Super Nintendo collection, and we have stuff like Yoshi's Island, Super Mario World, Super Mario All-Star. I really like the Super Nintendo, and I think it is one of my favorite consoles of all time. But moving down from that, we have my handheld collection, and you can see that again I have a few lost items here like Oddworld's Abe's Odyssey, and in the back there we see stuff like the beautiful Sega Game Gear, and also weird stuff like this McDonald's Sonic game, the amazing Neo Geo Pocket. I'm sad that I don't have the Neo Geo Pocket Color, Game Boy Pocket and Game Boy Color, PSP, Nintendo DS Original, the 3DS. We have another random GBA SP, as GBA is one of my favorite handheld consoles, but also this nice original GBA SP case. And in the back there we see more obscure things like the WonderSwan, and for East Europe guys this was pretty obscure. And as you can see, this Game Boy Advance SP case is really beautiful, and I like to have this while traveling with my SP. I really like the Monkey Island series, so there's a tribute to it on here. My filming skills were not that great at that time, but the gem of my collection at that time was this modded Game Boy Advance SP AGS 101, and I know they're common in the US, but in East Europe they were really difficult to find. Game Boy Advance and PSP Vita are there also. Moving down from there, we have my DS and 3DS loose copies and my Game Boy Advance collection. But we can also see random stuff like the Faxanadu box and the NES Adventure of Link Zelda 2. It should be in the Zelda shelf. And probably I decided that the Zelda shelf was too full, so I put more Zelda games down here. You can also see Link's Awakening, Minish Cap, the original Zelda with the NES Classic series, and the two Oracle of Ages and Oracles of Seasons. Probably I decided to keep these games here, as this is where I kept my collection for Game Boy Advance. And you can see at that time this was the best way I thought to keep the collection of loose Game Boy Advance games. And I bought these sleeves that are usually cigarette cards, and I've made these wooden frames for them, and then I just stuck them there, and it kind of worked for a little bit because I did wanted to display my games instead of having them in binders in some shelf. Moving down from there, we have my DS, some 3DS, and then PlayStation 1 and also PlayStation Vita games. And because I had lack of space, I did collected a lot of these games without the cases, and probably the cases in East Europe they're mostly lost, so we do like to collect loose copies. And then we can see I have a nice little collection of PlayStation 1 games, and as you can see they're a very diverse bunch. The few games that I have for PlayStation Vita, and moving down from there is my collection of Nintendo 64 games. And a little trick I want to show you is, because these shelves are quite deep, I like to cut these models and put them behind so the games are nice and tidy at the front of the shelves. And that is the case with all of them. I like to have those things throughout the shelf. Next to that I have these clone systems, and this was the original clone system. We call it the Terminator, and it was the original NES clone system. And next to that, a different clone system that actually takes original NES games. And here we see my N64 collection. It's not that big, but I have interesting things like Mario Party, Mario 64, Smash Brothers, Donkey Kong, Banjo-Kazooie, and even Killer Instinct. And at the bottom of that I have these shelves that I like to keep loose things in them. And in the bigger one I like to keep my Game Boy games, and I like to keep them organized in games that I've played and games that I've not played. And here I have the shelves with the games that I played, and you can see that I like to play my original games. I don't just like to collect them. We also have random stuff here like these infrared things for the Game Boy. They were supposed to make you not use the cable to transfer data from one Game Boy to the other. And I also like to collect these bootleg games for the Game Boy, and we can see that I have one here, random stuff like the Guitar Hero for the DS. These are actually the games that I have played and finished. We can see things like Burai Fighter, Mega Man, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and for the games that do not have a map but they're very difficult games, I used to like to print my own maps out from the internet and just have the physical map of the game. And we can see here I have this for Metroid 2. That was a very difficult game without a map. The last shelf of this is meant for cleaning stuff for all the NES, SNES and Game Boy games, and you know, if you have a collection of these types of games, that you need a little bit of maintenance that you need to do, like changing the batteries of Game Boy Advance games or cleaning the NES games with alcohol and Q-tips, but also WD-40 for cleaning those annoying sticker marks. I'm not a big comic book guy, but if I have a few, I just keep them hidden here in this binder. Something nice I have is the StarCraft strategy guide, and I wasn't big on collecting strategy guides, but if there was a random find that I used to get, I like to take him. And to be fair, comic books are really nice. And here I have two different pouches that I like to keep the games that I'm currently playing, and these I take with me when I go on a trip or something. And next to that is the small drawers that I like to keep my Sega Game Gear collection, but also random stuff like a few Neo Geo Pocket Color games that I have and a few manuals for the Game Boy Advance or NES. More Game Gear games in the second one, and in the third one some loose UMD games for the PSP, but also more Game Gear games. And I made this case, stuck it on the wall, and I'm displaying here my Donkey Kong Game Boy games and also my Mario games, but there's also Kirby's Dream Land 2 there last. And Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate being one of my favorite games, I also have this official Mortal Kombat 3 Fighting Guide magazine, and it is really cool, showing you all the fatalities and all the moves at the time. And on the wall next to that I have my console collection, and they're all ready to be plugged and play, but I do not keep them all plugged in at the same time. You will notice that sound is something very important to me, so I do have an old amplifier with a CD player and two old bookshelf speakers that are very high quality. And we can start from left to right, and we can see that the Nintendo Switch is already plugged in and ready to play. Xbox 360 is another one that's ready to play, and then we also have the Nintendo Wii and the Minis right there next to it. Then moving down from there I have the two models of the Sega Master System, Nintendo GameCube, Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, and Wii Mini, and this fighting stick for Street Fighter. Next to that I have my Xbox One ready to be played, and then two models of the Sega Mega Drive, Model 1 and Model 2, Sega Saturn with its 4 megabytes extension, and the beautiful Sega Dreamcast. Next to that I have the PlayStation, and we have the slim and the fat version, but also the PlayStation 1, the first version, and the PS1, the slim version. Unfortunately, I do not have the one that has the screen incorporated. And you can see another Super Nintendo down here. And the reason I have two is because one is the one chip model, and the way you can tell this is by opening this thing in the back and have a pic inside there. And if you can see 3 dots, it means you have the 2 chip, but if you can see a circle, it means you have the 1 chip. The 1 chip Super Nintendo is way better, and the image is way better with the video games. I also like to have these clone systems with multiple games for the Sega, and this really nice Atari that has an Activision collection. And the reason we don't see the NES here is because it's already plugged in this beautiful tiny CRT, and it's already ready to be played. This is one of my most played games, and it's on top of a small refrigerator that is filled with drinks and beers ready to be enjoyed in the hot summers of Romania. And you may have noticed that there was an empty spot here in my NES collection, and that is because that is one of my favorite NES games, and that is Adventure Island 2, and it's already in, and I was currently playing it. Alright, so that was my game room back in the day. What do you guys think? I'm really fond of that room, and I look back with nostalgia, and I really enjoyed living there for most of my adult life and collecting and setting it up in a way that actually represented me and my nature as a game collector. I would really like to hear from you guys, so please leave a comment. But until next time, thanks for watching my videos.